I have a list in my wallet. Folded piece of yellow legal paper, creased so many times the ink is fading at the folds. I started it the week I moved out. Things I want to do while my body still lets me. I've crossed off 11 things in 5 years. 11 things I never would have done in that house, in that marriage, in that silence. If you're sitting in a marriage right now that everyone calls good and you call surviving, stay with me. I spent 47 years in that chair. I know what the cushion feels like, how it shapes itself around you until you think it's holding you up, when really it's just keeping you in place. And I know what happens when you finally stand up. Everyone said I was throwing my life away. My blood pressure said I was finally getting it back. 5 reasons, not opinions, evidence, from my body, my bank account, my daughter's tears, and my mother's grave. I'm going to walk you through each one. I was diagnosed with lupus in 2006. I was 53. The rheumatologist explained it the way doctors do. Autoimmune condition. Your immune system attacks your own tissue. We'll manage it with medication. And I nodded and managed it. Flare-ups every month. Joint pain that moved around my body like a tenant who couldn't settle. Blood pressure climbing every year. Chronic insomnia that started around 2010 and never left. I blamed age. I blamed the lupus. I blamed my genes. My mother had high blood pressure. Her mother had high blood pressure. I figured it was just the hand I was dealt. That's what I told myself for 14 years. The hand I was dealt. What I didn't tell myself was this. The hand I was dealt included Leland. Leland Vance, my husband. 47 years. I need to tell you about Leland, and I need to do it honestly, which means I can't make him a monster because he wasn't one. Leland was an insurance claims manager. He went to work, he came home, he paid the bills, he mowed the lawn. He never hit me, never drank, never cheated as far as I know. He was what everyone called a good man. And he was an emotional desert. Leland communicated in logistics. What time is dinner? The gutters need cleaning. Did you pay the water bill? That was the full range. In 47 years of marriage, I can count on one hand the number of times that man asked me how I felt about anything. I don't mean deep philosophical conversations. I mean basic human check-ins. How was your day, Dorie? Are you all right? Is something bothering you? He didn't ask. Not because he was cruel, because it didn't occur to him. I was there, I was functioning, the house was running. What else was there to discuss? What else was there to discuss? That sentence is the marriage. Spring of 2020. I'm sitting in Dr. Anwar Hadid's office. I'd been seeing Anwar for 12 years. Good doctor, careful, the kind who looks at the whole picture, not just the symptom. He pulled up my chart on the screen. 10 years of data. And he didn't speak for a moment. He does this thing where he takes his glasses off and folds them very precisely before he says something he wants you to hear. Dorie, he said, your numbers track with stress, not aging. Something in your environment is doing this. I stared at him. because I knew. I'd known for years in the way you know something you can't afford to say out loud. My blood pressure wasn't climbing because I was getting old. My flare-ups weren't worsening because lupus is unpredictable. My insomnia wasn't random. My body had been keeping a record of my marriage for 47 years, and the record was right there on Anwar's screen, climbing and climbing and climbing like a chart with no ceiling. The environment was not the house. The environment was the man inside it. I left Leland in the fall of 2021. I was 71 years old. I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in Bethlehem. Smaller, quieter, mine. And within 6 months, my blood pressure dropped 22 points. My lupus flare-ups went from every month to twice a year. The insomnia that had been sitting on my chest for 11 years dissolved within 3 months. I stopped 2 medications. Not because of a new treatment, because of a new address. I want to be clear. I am not a doctor, and I am not saying divorce cures autoimmune disease. What I am saying is that my body was drowning in cortisol for decades, and cortisol suppresses immune function, raises blood pressure, triggers inflammatory responses, and feeds the exact conditions I was being treated for. When the source of the cortisol left my daily life, my body began to repair itself. That's not a miracle. That's biology. Leland wasn't poison. He wasn't violent or cruel. But he was, and I say this with as much compassion as I can gather, an emotional vacuum. And my body had been trying to survive in that vacuum for 47 years. It was telling me what my mouth wouldn't say. I just finally learned to read the chart. Here's the math nobody does. I left at 71. If I'm lucky, and healthy, and careful, and the genes cooperate, I have maybe 10, maybe 15 more years of real mobility. Years where my knees work, my mind is clear, I can drive myself places, walk without assistance, travel if I want to. That window isn't infinite, it's not even long, and it's closing. The question I asked myself in 2020, the one that kept me up at night, the one that finally mattered more than all the reasons to stay, was this. Do I want to spend that window sitting in a living room with a man who hasn't looked up from the television in a decade? Hildy asked it better. Hildreth Poplavsky, Hildy, has been my friend since we were both volunteers at the Bethlehem Food Bank in 1989. She's 74 now, widowed, built like a truck, and she has never once in 35 years told me something I wanted to hear when something I needed to hear was available. That's why I love her. We were at the Colonnade Diner, our place, bad coffee, good pie, same booth for 30 years. I was doing what I always did, describing my marriage and defending it in the same breath. Leland is stable. Leland is reliable. Leland never cheated. Leland never... And Hildy set her fork down. She doesn't slam things. She places them, the way you place a period at the end of something you mean. Dorie, she said, you've been describing a cell and calling it a house for 45 years. I stopped talking, because she'd taken something I'd been decorating for decades and stripped the paint off in one sentence. A cell, not a home. A cell, a place where everything is provided, food, shelter, routine, and nothing is free. I drove home that night and I thought about my mother, Rosemary Kessler, born 1925, Scranton, Pennsylvania. Married my father in 1953, stayed for 52 years, never left, never complained where anyone could hear. My mother was a telephone operator until she married, and then she was a wife, and that was the whole identity. She cooked, she cleaned, she endured my father's silences, a different kind of silence than Leland's, colder, with an edge of contempt that Leland never had. And she got smaller every year, like a photograph left in the sun. She spent her last 5 years, 73 to 78, in the same house she'd been unhappy in since 1958. She didn't travel. She didn't see anything. She watched television and took care of my father, who by then needed her physically the way he'd never needed her emotionally. And she died in the same bedroom she'd slept in every night of that marriage. Same bed, same window, same view of the same backyard she'd looked at for 45 years. My mother didn't get a decade of vitality. She got a decade of decline in the same chair. I was sitting in mine. Same chair, different decade. Same ending if I didn't move. The years between 70 and 85, those are the last years you can choose. After that, your body starts choosing for you. And I was not going to let those years belong to Leland's television and Leland's silence and Leland's gutters and Leland's dinner schedule. Those years were mine, the only ones I had left, and I took them. I need to tell you the thing that broke me open, not the blood pressure, not Hildy's sentence, not even my mother's bedroom. It was my daughter's voice on the phone 6 months after I left, saying something I will hear for the rest of my life. I was a school counsellor, 34 years in the Allentown School District, working with adolescents, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, kids who were dealing with things no child should carry. And I was good at my job. I was good at it because I believed in one thing absolutely. You deserve better than what is hurting you. I said it 1,000 times. To girls in bad relationships, to boys living in violent homes, to teenagers who thought that the way things were was the way things had to be. You deserve better. You don't have to stay. You have the right to choose differently. I said those words with complete conviction. And then I drove home to a man who hadn't asked me a meaningful question in 20 years. And I sat at a table where the silence was so thick it had a texture, and I stayed. I stayed, and I stayed, and I stayed, and my daughter watched me do it. Constance, Connie, called in the spring of 2022. She's 48, married to Eduardo, who is, and God it hurts to say this, exactly like her father. Good job, good provider, emotionally sealed off like a jar nobody taught him to open. Connie had been telling herself her marriage was fine. Fine, the most dangerous word in the English language when a woman uses it about her marriage. She called me crying, not about my divorce, about hers. The one she was suddenly seeing she might need. She said, "Mom, I've been telling myself my marriage is fine, but watching you leave at 71, if you can do it at 71, what's my excuse at 47? I held that phone and the room went sideways, because I understood in that moment what my 47 years had actually cost. Not just my blood pressure, not just my mother's ending replicated. I had taught my daughter, with my life, not my words, never my words, because my words were the right words, always the right words for everyone else's children. I had taught my daughter that a woman stays, that endurance is love, that silence is what marriage sounds like, that you sit in the chair until the chair is the only thing holding you up, and then you die in it. 3 generations. My mother stayed in Scranton, I stayed in Allentown, and Connie was staying in Bethlehem. Same lesson, passed down like a ring nobody wanted to wear, but nobody knew how to take off. My son Franklin, 44, lives outside Pittsburgh. He was furious when I left, called me and said, "You're throwing away 47 years, Mom. 47 years. He didn't speak to me for 4 months. That was its own kind of grief. Losing your son's understanding while trying to save your own life. But 18 months later, Franklin drove to Bethlehem, stood in the doorway of my apartment, the one I'd picked out myself, the one with the morning light in the kitchen and the quiet I'd never known I needed. He looked around. He looked at me, and he said, "You look different, Mom. You look like you're actually here." Actually here. I'd been physically present in that house in Allentown for 47 years, and my own son could tell I'd never been there. Not really. Not the way a person is present when they're alive inside their own life. If you have a daughter or a granddaughter, and you're staying in a marriage that stopped feeding you years ago, I need you to hear this. She's watching. She's learning right now from your silence what a woman's life is supposed to look like at the end. And she will replicate it, not because she wants to, because you taught her it was the only way. You can break that lesson. It might be the most important thing you ever do, not for yourself, though it will save you, for her, for the granddaughter who hasn't been born yet, for every woman in your line who comes after. You break it by leaving that chair. Now I need to talk about money, because money is the lock on the door. Money is what kept me in that house for at least 10 years longer than my body could afford. And money is where the lie lives. The lie that says staying is financially safer than leaving. Everyone told me I couldn't afford to divorce at 71. My sister Dolores said it outright. "Dorie, where are you going to go? You're 71. You can't start over." My neighbor said it softer. "At least you have the house. At least you're comfortable." Even my own brain, the brain that spent 34 years telling teenagers to choose better, even my brain said, "You're too old to be poor. Stay where the money is." And I believed it, for years. I believed that 100% of shared assets under Leland's management was safer than 50% under mine. I believed the house was security. I believed comfort was the same as stability. I was wrong. And I didn't know how wrong until I sat down with Sondra Phelan. Sondra is a divorce attorney in Allentown, late 50s, handles grey divorces. That's what they call it, grey divorce, divorce after 50 or 60. She's done hundreds. Hildy recommended her. Hildy recommends everyone, whether you asked or not. And I walked into her office in the summer of 2021 with my hands shaking and my stomach in a knot, convinced I was about to hear that leaving would bankrupt me. Sondra sat me down and did something nobody had done in 47 years of marriage. She showed me the numbers. Not Leland's version of the numbers. Not the version where he handled everything and I trusted him. The actual numbers. She took a legal pad and drew a line down the middle. Left column, what I'd have if I stayed. Right column, what I'd have if I left. Left column, Leland's pension, my pension, our combined social security, the house, the savings. Sounds like a lot. Then she started adding the other side. Leland's family history. His father had dementia, his uncle had dementia. Leland had no long-term care insurance. If Leland developed dementia, and the odds were not small, his care could consume $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 before Medicaid kicked in. And every dollar would come from our shared assets. My assets. My pension eaten by a medical catastrophe I had no control over. Then she told me about the credit card debt. $14,000. Leland had a credit card I didn't know about. $14,000 in charges, electronics, golf equipment, things I'd never seen, on a card that was in his name but attached to our shared financial life. I had trusted Leland with the finances for 47 years. That trust cost me $14,000 I didn't know we owed. Then the estate plan. Leland had not updated his will since 2003. Our children's names were on it. A grandchild who'd been born since was not. And the beneficiary on his life insurance was listed as his brother, not me. His brother. I'd been married to this man for 47 years, and someone else was the beneficiary on his life insurance, and I didn't know because I'd never asked, because I trusted him. Sondra set her pen down. She looked at me, and she said, "Half of something you control is worth more than all of something you don't." I sat in that office and I felt the lock on the door click open. The divorce gave me my pension, my social security, my share of the savings, and a small settlement from the house equity. I drive a smaller car now. My apartment is a third the size of the house. My budget is tighter. I notice the price of groceries in a way I didn't before. But I know where every penny is. I know what's owed. I know what's saved. I know what's protected, and I know whose name is on every account and every document and every beneficiary line. For the first time in my adult life, my financial reality is entirely visible to me. I'd rather stretch a dollar I own than depend on a dollar I can't see. If you're staying in a marriage because you're afraid of the money, I understand that fear. I lived inside it. But I need you to hear me. The risk of staying may be larger than the risk of leaving. You don't know what he owes. You don't know what he's signed. You don't know what his health will cost. And as long as your finances are tangled in someone else's decisions, your security is a story someone else is writing. You deserve to hold the pen. This is the one I should have understood first. I'm a school counselor. I spent 34 years teaching kids to name what they were feeling, and it took me until 71 to name what I was feeling in my own marriage. Here's what I felt. Nothing. Not rage, not betrayal, not the kind of pain that sends you to a therapist or a lawyer or a sister's couch at 2 in the morning. Nothing. A flat, featureless nothing that stretched from one end of the day to the other. Leland and I could go an entire weekend without a conversation that went deeper than, "We need milk," or "The furnace is making that sound again." We ate dinner at the same table in what I used to call comfortable silence, and now call what it was. The silence of two people who had stopped trying. There's a scene I need to describe because it's the scene that finally made me see. It was a Tuesday evening, approximately 2018. We're at the kitchen table. Dinner. I'd made chicken, roasted potatoes, green beans. Leland was eating. I was eating. The television was off. The house was quiet. And I tried. I said, "I just finished that book about the women in the French Resistance. It was remarkable. These ordinary women who—" Leland said. He didn't look up. I kept going. "Who risked everything, and nobody knew their names for decades. It made me think about—" I stopped talking. Leland kept eating. He didn't look up. He didn't ask what it made me think about. He didn't notice I'd stopped speaking. I sat across from him with half a sentence in my mouth, and he had no idea. No idea that I'd been mid-thought. No idea that I'd given up. No idea that the woman sitting 3 feet from him had just disappeared, again, the way she'd been disappearing for 20 years. He didn't notice I'd stopped speaking. That sentence is the most honest description of my marriage I can give you. The year before, 2017, I retired. Last day as a school counselor, 34 years. The students wrote letters. The principal gave a speech. The teachers threw a little party in the lounge with a cake that said, "We'll miss you, Mrs. Vance." I drove home with a box of cards and a heart that was full and breaking at the same time. Full because those kids mattered to me. Breaking because a chapter I loved was over. I walked in the door. Leland was at the table. I told him about the day, the letters, the speech, the cake. I got emotional. I'd given 34 years of my life to that school and those children, and I wanted my husband to see that it mattered, to see that I mattered. Leland listened, or appeared to. When I finished, he said, "So, what's the plan for dinner?" That was his response to the end of my career. What's for dinner? Not, "I'm proud of you." Not, "How does it feel?" Not even, "That's nice, Dorie." Dinner. Because dinner was the language he spoke, and my feelings were a language he'd never bothered to learn. I spent my entire career telling teenagers they deserved to be seen, that someone who ignores your feelings is not someone who respects you, that silence can be its own kind of cruelty. I said those things with conviction, and I meant them. And then I went home to a man who hadn't seen me in 20 years, and I called it a good enough marriage. A good enough marriage isn't good. It's just enough to keep you from leaving, and that's not the same thing. Good enough is the minimum disguised as the standard. Good enough is a ceiling you've mistaken for a floor. You think you're standing on something solid, when really you're pressed against the top of a box you could have climbed out of decades ago. People understand abuse. They understand addiction, infidelity, violence. Those have names. Those get sympathy at the dinner table. But emotional starvation, silent contempt, being looked through instead of looked at for 20, 30, 40 years, those don't leave marks anyone can see. Those don't make anyone gasp when you describe them. Those just hollow you out, slowly, from the inside, while everyone around you says how lucky you are. You are not lucky. You are starving in a house full of groceries. And the fact that the groceries are there doesn't mean you're being fed. I have that list in my wallet. Yellow legal paper folded small. 11 things crossed off in 5 years. I saw the Grand Canyon. I stood on the South Rim at sunrise and I cried. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because I was there. I was standing in a place I chose, at a time I chose, with no one to ask permission from and no one to report back to. Just Dorie on a rim, watching the sun do something extraordinary and not having to explain why it mattered. I took a train to Montreal by myself, sat in the dining car and had a glass of wine and talked to a woman from Vermont who was also traveling alone, also recently divorced, also 70-something, also holding a list in her wallet. We laughed so hard the waiter came to check on us. I hadn't laughed like that in years, maybe decades. I read 43 books last year, because I wanted to, because no one was in the room saying, because the quiet in my apartment is a quiet that feeds me instead of starving me. Leland wasn't a monster. I've said it and I'll say it once more, because the truth is complicated and I won't simplify it to make the story easier. Leland Vance was raised by a man who showed love by keeping the lights on, and a woman who never asked for more. He gave me what he was given as a boy, a roof, reliability, and nothing underneath. I don't hate him. I pity the boy who never learned that love requires more than presence. But I could not die in that house, waiting for him to discover it. Not when my mother already died that way. Not when my daughter was learning to die that way. My pastor said something once. She said, "God didn't build you to be someone's furniture." One sentence, but I felt it in my spine. If you're sitting in a marriage right now that looks fine from the outside and feels like nothing from the inside, if people tell you how lucky you are and you can't explain why that word makes you want to scream, I need you to hear me. You are not ungrateful. You are not crazy. You are not asking for too much. You are asking for the minimum of what a human being deserves. To be seen, to be heard, to matter to the person sitting across from you at dinner. And if that person cannot give you that, If he hasn't given you that in 10 years, 20 years, 40, then staying is not loyalty. Staying is not commitment. Staying is a slow, quiet, respectable way to disappear. You still have time. Your knees still work. Your mind still fires. The decade you're in right now, it belongs to you, not to his silence, not to his dinner schedule, not to his television. You. Take it. If this reached you today, send it to a woman who needs permission to stand up from that chair. And subscribe, because we are just getting started, you and me. I'm 76 years old. I've got a 2-bedroom apartment, a life list with 11 things crossed off, and peace I didn't know existed until I was brave enough to be alone. Comfort isn't the same as peace. I had comfort for 47 years. I've had peace for 5. I know which one I'm keeping.